Her letters went unanswered for years. The cowboy found her waiting by the fence. The twin suns were sinking behind the jagged hills of Kepler 57, casting long, orange shadows over the dusty plains. Jace Mercer leaned against the rail of his small wooden porch, staring at the horizon where the last light of the day flickered like a dying candle. His hat was pulled low, and his weathered hands held a mug of thick, bitter coffee, still warm from the pot. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and metal from the distant mining station, but his mind was far from the quiet rhythms of ranch life. Jace had always loved the vastness of the plains. It reminded him of freedom, of the endless paths humans could carve across the galaxy. But today, the beauty of the world felt hollow. Years had passed since he had last heard from Alara, the woman who had once filled his thoughts, his letters, and even his dreams. She had been on the orbital station, a place humans had built above the planet like a jewel of glass and steel. She had a mind for technology, a heart that seemed to shine brighter than the neon lights of the station, and a stubborn streak that matched his own. When they had first met, she had been curious, questioning, always pushing the boundaries of human ingenuity. Jace had admired her from the start, not for her brilliance alone, but for her unwavering faith in humanity's ability to thrive, even on the edge of a harsh universe. He remembered the first letter he had written her. He had stayed up for hours, dipping his pen into ink and filling page after page with words he hoped would reach her across the void. He had poured his soul into those letters, confessing his feelings, sharing stories of his lonely nights on the plains, and promising that no matter the distance, he would remain steadfast. And then, nothing. Days had passed without a reply, then weeks, months, and eventually years. He had begun to think she had forgotten him, or perhaps that life on the station had moved on without room for him. Yet he never stopped writing. Each letter was a whisper of hope, a testament to the human spirit that refused to give up, even when faced with silence. Jace's ranch was small, a modest spread of land with a few hardy livestock and a fenced corral. It was the kind of place where a man could lose himself in work and the wide-open skies. He tended to his animals, repaired fences, and kept watch over the land, but none of it filled the emptiness left by unanswered letters. He sometimes wondered if humanity itself was a little like those letters, fragile, reaching across space and time, hoping someone somewhere would notice. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that cut through the evening air. Jace rubbed his hands together and took a deep breath. He wasn't a man given to despair, but even he had to admit that the ache of waiting, of hoping for something that might never come, was heavier than any pack of wild beasts or storm that roared across the plains. It was then that he noticed something unusual. Near the edge of the fence, something small glimmered in the fading light. At first, he thought it was a trick of the sun on metal, but as he squinted, he saw a tiny drone hovering hesitantly. Its frame was simple, a design he recognized from the orbital station. And in its grasp was a small envelope, worn around the edges but unmistakably marked with handwriting he had not seen in years, Alara S. Jace felt a surge of disbelief and joy. He set his coffee down, his hands trembling as he stepped toward the drone. It landed gently on the ground, extending the envelope like an old friend returning after a long journey. For a moment, he just stared at it, hesitant to break the fragile bridge across years of silence. Then, with careful fingers, he opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was just as he remembered, precise, flowing, and undeniably hers. Jace, I have received your letters. I have read each one, every single day. I wanted to write back, but the sector wars began and communications were locked down. I could not risk sending messages through channels that might never reach you, or worse, put you in danger. I have never stopped thinking of you. I have never forgotten. If you are still willing, I would see you again. I will be waiting by the fence. The words struck him with the force of a meteor. All the years of unanswered letters, the nights of loneliness, the aching hope, they were not lost. She had remembered him. She had waited. Humanity, he realized, was not just the machines they built or the colonies they spread across planets. It was the persistence, the loyalty, the stubborn will to survive and connect even when the odds were against them. Jace held the letter close, feeling warmth spread through his chest. He could hear the distant calls of his livestock, the whisper of the wind through the plains, but all of it faded as his mind raced. He had imagined this moment countless times, yet now that it was here, it was more vivid than he had ever allowed himself to hope. He knew what he had to do. Tomorrow, he would mount his rover and set out for the orbital station. The journey would be long, filled with danger and uncertainty. Rogue storms, automated patrols, and the sheer vastness of the terrain would test him, but nothing could stop him from reaching her. He had waited years for this, and now that a chance had appeared, he would not let it slip away. As night fell, the twin moons rose above the horizon, casting silver light across the plains. Jace sat back on the porch, the letter pressed to his chest, and for the first time in years he allowed himself to imagine the future. He imagined her smile, the spark in her eyes, and the moment they would finally stand together again. The stars above seemed to shimmer with a kind of approval, a quiet reminder of the universe's vastness and humanity's ability to endure within it. Jace Mercer, the lone cowboy of Kepler 57, felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream. He would not let the distance, the silence, or the years of waiting define the story of him and Alara. He would write the next chapter himself, not with ink and paper but with courage, determination, and the human spirit that refused to be silenced. Tomorrow, he would ride toward the horizon, toward the stars, toward her. And no matter what challenges awaited, he would remind the universe that humans, with all their imperfections and stubborn hearts, could overcome even the void of space to reach someone they loved. The night deepened, but Jace did not sleep. He sat on the porch, gazing at the fence, imagining the day when she would truly be waiting there. And somewhere, far above the planet, Alara's thoughts and hopes were traveling the same path across the void, destined to meet at last. The next morning, the first light of the twin suns broke over the jagged hills of Kepler 57, casting a golden glow across the dusty plains. Jace Mercer was already awake, standing beside his rover, checking the straps and fuel cells with meticulous care. The small starbound vehicle had been his companion on many long journeys, across deserts, mountains, and the rocky plateaus of distant colonies. Today, it would carry him towards something far more important than cargo or supplies. It would carry him to Alara. He ran a hand across the rover's worn hull, feeling the smooth metal beneath calloused fingers. It was a quiet, steady presence, a reminder that human ingenuity could tame even the harshest environments. He climbed into the seat, strapped himself in, and took one last look at his ranch, the familiar corral, and the fence where so many lonely nights had been spent staring at the horizon. Then, with a deep breath, he fired the engines. The rover's low hum joined the whispering wind, and Jace set his eyes on the distant orbital station, barely visible as a silver speck in the sky. The first few hours were uneventful. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with small clusters of hardy plants that had adapted to survive the thin atmosphere and scorching sun. Jace maneuvered carefully, avoiding loose rocks and hidden crevices, his instincts honed over years of surviving in the wilderness. He felt alive, more alert than he had in years, because now there was a purpose driving him, a reason to face any danger that might come. As he traveled, memories of Alara surfaced unbidden. He remembered the first time he saw her, standing on the observation deck of the orbital station, her hair catching the light from the suns as she studied the star charts. She had a spark in her eyes, a mixture of curiosity and determination that humans often carried in their veins. Even then, he had sensed that she was one of the few who truly understood what humanity could achieve, even on the edge of a distant planet. He also remembered the letters he had written. Each one had been carefully folded and placed in envelopes, addressed to her station. They had been more than words, had been pieces of himself, fragments of hope and longing that he had sent across the void. And now, after years of silence, she had responded. The letter in his hands had felt heavier than any he had ever carried. Hours passed, and the terrain began to change. The flat plains gave way to jagged canyons and rocky ridges, the colors shifting from sandy golds to deep reds and browns. Jace slowed the rover, careful to navigate the narrow paths that wound between towering rock formations. This section of the planet was dangerous. One wrong move could send the rover tumbling into the ravine below. But he was steady, experienced, and determined. Every rock, every gust of wind, every shadow reminded him of what he was fighting for. By midday, the suns were high in the sky, beating down with unrelenting heat. Jace took a break, resting on a large boulder that offered shade and a view of the winding canyon below. He pulled out the letter again, reading Alara's words once more. She had spoken of the sector wars, of the communications lockdown, and of her fear for him. She had never stopped thinking of him, never stopped hoping. Jace smiled, a rare, full smile that reached his eyes. Humans were not just survivors, they were dreamers, builders, and fighters. Even in the darkest times, even when separated by light years and silence, they found ways to endure. Alara had endured. He had endured. And now they were about to be reunited, their resilience proving stronger than the void that had kept them apart. As he prepared to continue, the wind shifted, carrying a strange sound across the canyon. It was faint at first, like the whisper of metal against metal, but it grew louder. Jace squinted, scanning the rocks and dust. There it was, a small drone, not unlike the one that had delivered Alara's letter. It hovered uncertainly, its sensors glowing with soft blue light. Jace frowned. He had expected challenges on this journey, but not this. The drone moved closer, scanning him with quiet precision. Then, without warning, a voice crackled through a small speaker. "Identify yourself. This sector is restricted." Jace leaned back, his hands resting on the rover controls. "I'm Jace Mercer. I'm traveling to the orbital station. I mean no harm." There was a pause, then, "Verification required. You must provide credentials or be turned back." He groaned. He had forgotten that certain sectors of the planet were under strict surveillance, even in times of peace. The drone wasn't hostile, but it would not allow him to pass without proof that he was authorized. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small identification chip, one issued by the Planetary Council long ago. He held it up to the drone's scanner. "Credentials verified," the voice said after a few tense moments. The drone retreated, hovering above him for a few seconds before darting back toward the canyon walls. Jace exhaled slowly, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "That was close," he muttered to himself. Humans had always faced obstacles, from the harshness of nature to the complexities of their own technology. Each challenge was a test of ingenuity and patience. Today had been just that, a test, and he had passed. The rover rumbled forward again, carrying him deeper into the canyon. Shadows stretched across the rocks as the suns began their descent. Jace marveled at the resilience of life here. Hardy plants clung to cliff faces, and small animals darted between crevices, surviving against the odds. He thought of humanity the same way, small, fragile, yet determined to thrive even in the harshest conditions. By evening, he reached a narrow pass that led to the edge of a vast plateau. Below lay a valley shimmering with the lights of the orbital station in the distance. Jace stopped the rover, staring at the sight. It was breathtaking. The station floated above the valley like a silver jewel, its lights reflecting on the plains below. And there, Just beyond the fence that marked the edge of the landing zone was a solitary figure. His heart skipped a beat. Even from a distance, he recognized her stance, the way she stood straight yet relaxed, scanning the horizon as if she had been expecting him. Alara. She was real. She had waited. Jace set the rover to a steady pace, descending toward the valley. The wind had grown stronger, carrying dust and the faint hum of the station's energy shields. Each meter closer made his pulse quicken, and he felt the weight of the years melt away. The journey had been long, the dangers many, but nothing mattered now except the woman who had survived as much as he had, holding onto hope like a flame against the dark. When he reached the fence, he slowed the rover to a stop. Alara turned slightly and their eyes met. For a moment neither spoke. Time seemed to stand still, the valley stretching out beneath the twin moons, the wind carrying the scent of earth and metal. Jace felt a surge of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, relief, joy, and awe all at once. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. "Alara," she smiled, a small, shy smile that quickly grew into one full of warmth and recognition. "Jace," she said, her voice carrying across the small distance between them. "You came." "I promised," he replied simply. Promises were human things, forged in hope and kept through perseverance. And humans, he realized again, never gave up easily. They stepped closer, the rover parked behind them, the fence between them fading in significance. Words were unnecessary at first. Their presence, the shared understanding of years lost and finally found, said more than any letter ever could. Humans had endured. Humans had fought the odds. And now, humanity's quiet triumph was here, in the simple act of two hearts reconnecting across space and time. The twin moons rose higher, casting silver light on the valley. Jace and Alara stood together by the fence, a symbol of separation overcome, a testament to human persistence and connection. The winds whispered around them, carrying with them the knowledge that distance, silence, and uncertainty could never break the bonds forged by hope and courage. In that moment, the universe seemed to pause, acknowledging the enduring power of humanity. Jace felt it deep within him, the certainty that no matter the challenges ahead, no matter the obstacles of space or time, humans could reach across the void and hold onto what truly mattered. And for the first time in years, he felt complete. The valley stretched below Jace as he and Alara paused for a moment by the fence. Twin moons reflected silver light on the rocks and plains, casting long shadows that flickered with the wind. The reunion was quiet, gentle, a moment of peace before the next challenge. But Jace knew that their time together would be brief until they had reached somewhere safe, somewhere they could finally talk without fear of patrol drones or rogue storms interrupting them. Alara glanced at him, her eyes filled with the same determination he had always admired. "We need to leave soon," she said softly. "The sector wars may have ended, but the automated patrols still scan this region. They don't recognize civilian travelers without authorization." Jace nodded. The hum of the rover behind them reminded him that their journey had only just begun. This was no simple ride across the plains. It would take them across rugged canyons, treacherous cliffs, and finally to the orbital transport station several valleys away. Every mile would test their endurance, their wits, and their resolve. Humans, he realized, thrived not because the universe was easy, but because they refused to surrender to its hardships. They mounted the rover together. Alara sat beside him, her hands resting lightly on the metal frame, scanning the horizon as the vehicle rumbled to life. The engines hummed with energy, blending with the soft wind of the early night. The first leg of the journey was calm, the rover gliding over the plains as the moons traced arcs across the sky. Jace allowed himself a small smile. "I can't believe you waited here all this time." Alara returned his smile, though it was tinged with the sadness of lost years. "I had no choice," she said. "Every day I hoped, Every day I feared the letters never reached you, but I couldn't stop thinking of you, Jace. Even in the station, surrounded by technology and orders, my mind was always here on this plane. The word struck him, a reminder of human endurance. Distance, isolation, and fear could not erase hope, nor could time erase loyalty. Humans had a stubbornness unlike any other species. They endured, they hoped, they built bridges where none seemed possible. Jace felt pride, not just for her, but for humanity itself. As the rover approached the first canyon pass, the terrain became rougher. Jagged rocks jutted out of the ground, and narrow paths wound along cliffs that dropped sharply into the darkness below. Jace slowed the vehicle, carefully steering along the path. Every turn required precision. One mistake, one slip, and the rover could tumble into the canyon, leaving them stranded, or worse. Ilara watched him quietly, occasionally pointing out subtle signs of danger, a loose rock, a sudden slope, or a patch of sand that could hide a deep crevice. She had been trained for these conditions, and Jace appreciated her keen senses. Humans had always relied on each other's strengths, combining skill, intuition, and courage to survive. Hours passed. The twin moons rose higher and the valley below faded into darkness. They paused only briefly to rest, sharing water and protein packs, and keeping a vigilant watch for any patrol drones. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken words and the quiet hum of the rover. Then, as they rounded a bend in the canyon, a sudden storm hit. Dust and debris whipped around them, reducing visibility to almost zero. Jace tightened his grip on the controls, feeling the rover shake under the force of the wind. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar. Ilara braced herself, gripping the side of the vehicle. The storm was unlike any they had experienced, hot winds carrying fine dust, punctuated by sharp gusts that threatened to throw the rover off course. Jace relied on instinct, honed from years of navigating harsh terrain. He slowed the vehicle to a crawl, scanning the path ahead for danger. The storm raged for what felt like hours. Every turn was a test, every shadow a potential threat. And yet through it all they continued. Humans were remarkable creatures, he thought, not because they could avoid danger, but because they faced it head-on with courage and resolve. Every gust, every rock, every challenge only strengthened their determination. Finally, the storm began to die down. The twin moons shone more clearly, revealing the canyon walls ahead. Jace guided the rover carefully through the remaining twists and turns until they reached a plateau overlooking a vast, open stretch of plains. The storm had left a quiet calm, and the stars above reflected in the polished metal of the rover. Ilara exhaled deeply. "That was closer than I expected," she said. Jace nodded, a small smile on his face. "Every journey has its trials. But we made it." He glanced at her, feeling the weight of their shared experience. Humans were not defined by comfort. They were defined by endurance, by the courage to continue even when the odds were against them. And today, they had proven it once again. The next morning, they set out across the open plains. The terrain was easier now, but not without danger. They encountered rogue wildlife, creatures adapted to the harsh environment, swift and cunning. A group of them, covered in scales and with sharp claws, appeared near the path. Jay stopped the rover, assessing the situation. Ilara whispered, "We can't outrun them forever. We need a plan." Jace nodded, scanning the landscape. He remembered a narrow canyon to the east, where the creatures were less likely to follow. Using the rover's engines and carefully timed movements, they maneuvered through the canyon, keeping the creatures at bay. Humanity, he realized again, was remarkable not because it avoided threats, but because it could outthink, outmaneuver, and survive them. As the day wore on, they passed abandoned settlements, relics of old colonies that had failed. Rusting metal, toppled buildings, and empty fields reminded them of the fragility of human life, but also of human persistence. Despite the failures, Humans had never stopped trying, never stopped building, exploring, and reaching for something beyond the horizon. By evening, they reached a river cutting through the plains. Its waters reflected the colors of the setting suns, and the gentle sound of flowing water was a welcome relief after days of dust and heat. They stopped the rover at the riverbank, taking a moment to rest. Alara looked at the water, then at Jace. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Even here, so far from the stars, the universe gives us moments like this." Jace nodded. "That's what makes humans us. We notice, we appreciate, we survive. We find beauty in places others might not even look." They camped beside the river that night, lighting a small fire and sharing rations. The warmth of the flames and the quiet murmur of water gave them a sense of normalcy, even in the middle of a harsh, alien world. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of the past, of letters lost and finally found, of the challenges they had faced, and the hope that had carried them through. The journey had tested them physically, mentally, and emotionally, but it had also reminded them of the strength of the human spirit. Humans were builders, fighters, dreamers, and lovers. They endured hardships not for survival alone, but for connection, for purpose, and for moments like this, quiet, fleeting, and precious. As they prepared to continue the next morning, Jace looked at Alara and felt a surge of determination. The orbital station was still miles away, and the final stretch would be the hardest yet. Automated patrols, treacherous terrain, and unpredictable weather awaited them. But they had faced storms, wildlife, and long stretches of isolation together. They were humans. They could endure anything. And so, with the twin moons fading and the suns rising behind them, Jace and Alara mounted the rover once more. Their journey across the alien plains continued, a testament to human courage, ingenuity, and the refusal to give up, even when the universe seemed determined to test them at every turn. The stars above shimmered like distant beacons, and Jace felt the familiar thrill of hope rising within him. No matter what lay ahead, he knew that humans, with their persistence, intelligence, and heart, could conquer even the harshest worlds. And together, they would reach the place where hope had waited all along, the orbital station, where lost letters had finally found their way, and where humanity's enduring spirit would shine in full. The morning light spilled over the rocky horizon as Jace and Alara continued their journey across the plains. The twin suns, now high and bright, cast sharp shadows over the ridges and valleys, and the wind carried a faint metallic scent from the distant orbital station. Every mile they traveled brought them closer to their destination, and closer to the moment that had been years in the making. Alara scanned the horizon continuously, her eyes sharp, always looking for signs of patrol drones or other hazards. "We should reach the landing zone by dusk if we keep moving steadily," she said. Her voice held excitement, but beneath it was caution, a reminder that even after years of waiting, the universe did not yield its challenges easily. Jace nodded. "We've come this far. Nothing can stop us now." His words carried certainty, but he knew better than to underestimate the dangers that still lay ahead. Humans, he reminded himself, were strong not because they were invincible, but because they never gave up, even when faced with impossible odds. The terrain changed once again. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills and shallow canyons, dotted with hardy plants that survived the thin atmosphere and harsh sunlight. Their rover rumbled along a worn path, its engines humming steadily, a mechanical heartbeat accompanying their own. Despite the long journey, the vehicle remained reliable, a testament to human engineering and to the skill of those who built and maintained it. As they approached the outskirts of the orbital station's landing zone, the landscape became more complex. Rusting fences, old control towers, and abandoned equipment marked the edge of human habitation. It was a place that seemed frozen in time, yet it still carried signs of life. Birds, Small creatures and the occasional whir of distant drones reminded them that even in the farthest reaches of space, life persisted. Alara pointed toward a narrow gap in the fence that ran along the valley floor. "This used to be a supply route," she explained. "It's still passable, though the last few patrols likely wouldn't check it often." Her eyes met Jace's, and in that glance, he saw the same mixture of hope and caution that mirrored his own. Humans had always survived by observing, adapting, and thinking ahead. They guided the rover carefully through the gap, the vehicle's wheels crunching over gravel and sand. Every movement required precision, and every decision mattered. Jace marveled at how humans could face uncertainty and danger with such calm determination. This wasn't just instinct, it was intelligence shaped by experience, courage honed by necessity, and a heart willing to endure. Once through the gap, the station itself came into full view. It floated above the valley like a massive jewel, its sleek metallic design glowing softly in the twin suns' light. Docking bays, landing pads, and energy fields stretched below, a testament to human ingenuity and the ability to terraform not just planets, but the skies themselves. Jace slowed the rover as they approached the fence marking the final boundary of the landing zone. Beyond it, the platform rose, connecting the valley to the orbital station. And there she was, standing exactly where the letter had promised. Alara's words had been accurate. She had waited. Years had passed, yet she remained there by the fence, facing the horizon. Her posture was relaxed but alert, her eyes scanning for him even as the wind teased her hair. Time had changed nothing in her determination, nothing in her patience. Humans, he realized, could endure more than any alien challenge or technological obstacle. Hope and loyalty were stronger than distance and fear. Jay stopped the rover a short distance away, feeling a wave of emotion he had not expected. Relief, awe, and joy mingled inside him, forming a warmth that spread from his chest outward. He could see every detail. The way the light caught her eyes, the slight tilt of her head, the way she clutched a small bundle of papers at her side, perhaps letters or notes from the years they had been apart. He stepped from the rover, boots crunching on gravel, and took a careful pace toward her. The wind swirled around them, carrying the scent of metal, earth, and life itself. This moment was fragile, yet solid, a culmination of hope, persistence, and human spirit. Alara turned slightly at the sound of his steps, and when she saw him, her eyes widened. A soft smile formed, hesitant at first, then growing with recognition and joy. "Jace," she breathed, almost a whisper, but it carried across the short distance. He stopped, standing a few feet away, and met her gaze. "Alara," he said simply. The name held all the emotions of years gone by: regret, longing, hope, and finally, fulfillment. Humans could endure separation, but they could also endure the joy of reunion. For a moment, neither moved. Time seemed to stretch, allowing them to take in the gravity of the reunion. The fence between them was no longer a barrier. It was a symbol of patience and hope, of distance conquered and promises kept. Jace thought of all the letters he had written, all the nights spent staring at the horizon, wondering if she would ever receive them. And now, here she was, real and waiting, proof that humanity's persistence could defy even the void of space. Finally, Alara stepped forward, closing the distance. They met at the fence, hands brushing, and for the first time the barrier felt irrelevant. Words flowed easily now, stories of the years apart, confessions of fear, and tales of hope kept alive through letters and memory. Humans, he realized again, were remarkable, not because they avoided challenges, but because they faced them together, trusting in the bond between hearts. As the suns began to set, painting the valley in shades of gold and red, they moved beyond the fence, walking toward the station's landing pad. Every step was careful, measured, yet filled with anticipation. They spoke of the journey, of storms faced and obstacles overcome, and of the simple human ability to endure and connect despite impossible odds. The orbital station loomed above them, its lights glowing like a beacon. Automated systems hummed softly, scanning the valley and ensuring that only authorized travelers approached. Jace and Alara presented themselves to the security interface, providing identification and credentials. The system verified their information, granting them passage with a quiet hum. As they entered the station, the contrast with the plains was striking. Sleek metal corridors, bright lights, and the low hum of machinery surrounded them. Yet even here, the human element was present. Engineers working with calm precision, technicians coordinating systems, and the quiet resilience of a population that had endured isolation, conflict, and distance. Humanity, he realized, thrived not just on planets but in the stars, carrying the same spirit across worlds. Ilara led him to a small observation deck, overlooking the valley below. They stood together, watching the plains stretch into the distance, remembering the journey that had brought them here. Humans had endured storms, harsh landscapes, and the passage of years. And now they had triumphed, not through weapons or battles, but through persistence, courage, and hope. Jace looked at her, seeing the determination, intelligence, and warmth that had drawn him to her years ago. "We made it," he said quietly. Ilara smiled, her eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "We did, together." The twin moons rose over the horizon, casting silver light across the valley and the station. The fence, once a symbol of waiting and separation, was now behind them. The journey had been long and the trials many, but humanity had proven itself once again. Not through dominance or conquest, but through resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring power of connection. They spent the night on the observation deck, talking and planning the days ahead. The station was safe, but their lives had changed. They had proven that humans could endure impossible odds, overcome distance, and maintain hope even when it seemed lost. The quiet triumph of survival and reunion was a victory that no battle could surpass. As they watched the stars twinkle above the plains of Kepler 57, Jace understood a truth that had been reinforced by every challenge of the journey. Humans were remarkable. Not because they were fearless or infallible, but because they persevered, adapted, and loved with a stubborn determination that could outlast storms, wars, and years of silence. And in that quiet victory, by the fence and under the twin moons, they found not just each other, but the enduring spirit of humanity reflected in their hearts. The twin moons had vanished behind the horizon, leaving the valley under the soft glow of the twin suns. Jace Mercer and Alara stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, looking out at the plains of Kepler 57. The land stretched endlessly, a patchwork of gold and red under the morning light, and yet the world outside seemed almost secondary. The real journey, the one that had mattered for years, was now behind them. They had found each other again. Ilara turned to him, her eyes reflecting both relief and a quiet wonder. "I never thought this moment would come," she said softly. "After all these years, after all the silence." Her voice trailed, but the meaning was clear. Hope had survived. Humanity had endured. Jace nodded, feeling the weight of every letter he had ever written pressed gently against his chest. He had spent countless nights imagining this reunion, wondering if she had read his words, if she had remembered him at all. And now she was here, real, alive, and waiting. Humans had always been remarkable in their ability to endure, to hope, and to maintain connections across time, distance, and silence. They decided to leave the station that day and return to the ranch. It was not just a return to familiarity, but a reclaiming of the life they had both imagined for so long. Jace mounted his rover first, making sure it was fully operational for the long journey ahead. Ilara followed, her hands steady on the vehicle, her eyes scanning the horizon with that same vigilance that had helped them survive the past days. Humans were not just survivors, they were observers, thinkers, planners, and doers. Their journey had proven that. The ride down to the plains was calm, almost serene. The twin suns bathed the landscape in soft light, highlighting every ridge and valley. Jace could feel the years of anticipation, worry, and longing slowly melting away. Every mile brought them closer to the fence, to the ranch, and to the life they had both dreamed of. When they finally reached the familiar fence, Jace stopped the rover. The sight of it, weathered, sun-bleached, and standing resilient against the winds, was comforting. It had been a marker of distance, a symbol of waiting and separation. Now it represented endurance, hope, and the triumph of persistence. Ilara stepped down first, her boots crunching on the dry earth. She ran her hand along the top rail of the fence, her fingers tracing its familiar shape. "You made it," she said, almost in disbelief. "You really made it." Jace smiled. "We made it," he corrected gently. Together, humanity, he realized, always accomplished more when hearts and minds worked together. Alone, they could endure. Together, they could thrive. They walked along the fence toward the corral, the ranch bathed in the warm light of the setting suns. The animals, startled at first by their presence, soon recognized the humans they trusted and returned to their routines. Jace and Ilara worked side by side, repairing broken sections of the fence, feeding the livestock, and tending to the small garden that had survived the harsh seasons. Every task reminded them that humans thrived through action, persistence, and care. Even the simplest acts, feeding animals, repairing fences, were demonstrations of resilience and ingenuity. As night fell, they sat by a small fire near the corral, sharing a simple meal. The air was filled with the soft sounds of the plains, wind through the dry grass, distant calls of nocturnal creatures, and the quiet hum of life continuing in the universe. Jace pulled out the letters he had carried all these years, the worn envelopes and pages that had once been his only connection to Ilara. He held them gently, as if they were sacred relics of hope. "These letters," he said, "were my way of holding onto you, holding onto hope. I never knew if they reached you, but I couldn't stop sending them." Ilara reached for one, carefully unfolding it. Her eyes softened as she read the familiar handwriting, the words that had once traveled across light years and uncertainty to reach her. "I never stopped thinking of you, Jace," she said. "Even when I couldn't respond, even when I was trapped by duty and danger, I held onto your words. They kept me going. They reminded me that humans can endure, that hope survives, and that some connections are stronger than distance or time." Jace nodded. "And now," he said quietly, "we don't need letters anymore." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. Humans endured not just by surviving, but by creating bonds, by persisting in love, loyalty, and hope. The letters had been a bridge, but the bridge was no longer necessary. They were finally together. The days that followed were filled with work and quiet joy. They repaired the ranch, reinforced the corral, and prepared the land for the seasons ahead. Together, they explored the plains, taking note of changes, small discoveries, and the creatures that thrived in the harsh environment. Humans, they realized, had a way of making even the most challenging landscapes livable. Adaptation, ingenuity, and cooperation were not just survival tools, they were expressions of the human spirit. One evening, as the twin moons rose again over the horizon, Jace and Ilara sat atop a small hill overlooking the plains. The wind carried the scents of earth and grass, mingled with the faint metallic tang of distant mining stations. Below, the ranch stood firm, a testament to persistence and care. Ilara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about all the years we spent apart?" she asked softly. Jace smiled, pressing a hand to hers. "I do," he admitted, "but I also think about how humans endure. We adapt, we hope, we survive, and now we've finally built the life we imagined." The quiet night stretched on, and they talked about the future, plans to expand the ranch, to explore the valley further, and to perhaps one day share their story with others. Every idea, every plan was infused with human determination and hope. They were not just surviving, they were thriving, building, and creating. Weeks turned into months. Seasons changed, and the plains of Kepler 57 shifted from dry gold to the rare greens that survived brief rains. Jace and Alara worked together, tending to livestock, repairing fences, and cultivating small patches of crops. Every action reinforced a truth they had both known since the beginning. Humans endure not because the universe is easy, but because they refuse to give up, because they build, care, and hope against all odds. The letters, once the bridge across years in silence, were carefully stored in a box in the small cabin. They were reminders of persistence, patience, and love, but no longer necessary for connection. Jace and Alara communicated face to face, sharing thoughts, fears, and joys as humans had for millennia. The past had led them here, but the present was their creation. One quiet evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of crimson and purple, Jace and Alara stood together by the fence. The wind carried the whispers of the plains, a gentle reminder of the harsh, beautiful world they had chosen to inhabit. Humans, he realized, had always survived not just because of strength or technology, but because of heart. Hope, loyalty, and persistence were as essential as food, water, and shelter. Ilara smiled, resting her hand in his. "We're home," she said. Jace nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "We are, and nothing, no distance, no time, no war can change that." Above them, the first stars appeared in the sky, twinkling like distant beacons. Humans had always reached for the stars, driven by curiosity, hope, and the desire to connect. Jace and Alara had traveled across plains, survived storms, and endured years of silence, yet their story was now one of triumph, not struggle. Humanity had proven itself once more, not through dominance or conquest, but through perseverance, connection, and the courage to hope. The nights that followed were calm. They built a life together on the ranch, taking comfort in daily routines and the simple pleasures of companionship. Humans thrived in such moments, finding strength in small victories, joy in shared work, and meaning in connection. Jace and Alara's love, once sustained by letters and distant hope, now flourished in presence, laughter, and mutual care. One evening, sitting by the fire, Jace looked at Alara and said softly, "All those letters, all those years of waiting, it was worth it. Every day, every risk, every word." Alara smiled, her eyes shining in the firelight. "Yes," she replied, "because humans endure, because we hope, and because love, real connection, can survive even the greatest distances." They sat together, hands entwined, watching the stars above. The twin moons had set, but their light lingered in memory, a reminder that even in darkness hope persisted. Humanity had triumphed in quiet ways, through endurance, courage, ingenuity, and heart. The fence, once a symbol of separation, now stood as a reminder of persistence rewarded. Jace and Alara had crossed every distance, endured every challenge, and finally arrived at the life they had dreamed of. And in that moment, on the plains of Kepler 57, humanity's enduring spirit shone brightly. Not in battles won or empires conquered, but in hope kept alive, promises fulfilled, and love finally reunited. They had survived the void, the silence, and the years apart. And now letters were no longer needed. Humanity, with its courage, patience, and heart, had carried them home.